Good afternoon and welcome to In Focus. I'm Juanita Tautungi. Today we're putting Aboriginal Veterans Day in focus. Today is November 8th. It's a day when our nation recognizes the contributions Aboriginal people made for our country. Aboriginal Veterans Day began in Manitoba in 1994 before spreading across the country. Veteran Affairs Canada says more than 7,000 First Nations members served in the First and Second World Wars, including the Korean War. Inuit, Metis, and other Indigenous people also served, but it is unknown how many participated. Veteran Affairs Canada also says one veteran group estimates that 12,000 Indigenous men and women served in the three wars. And we want you to join in on our conversation today. Our phone lines are open. Call us toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. You can also tweet us at APTN InFocus. Use the hashtag Veterans in Focus. Before I introduce you to our guest, let's set the scene.
They played a major role because they were all snipers, because they knew how to hunt, they knew how to stalk. Most of them were, they got them as scouts going up and snipers.
There were sad moments. Sad moments. I've been with guys, young fellas from home, laying on our bunk beds, you can hear them crying at night. They're homesick. It's sad. War is it's kind of an ugly word, really. I never want to talk about it.
The most thing that haunts me the most is the first person I had to take down. He was no older than I was, and he was just as scared as I was. But I just happened to take the first shot, and after that, I just became numb. I had to do what I had to do, but it wasn't until after I came out the service. I had a very hard time with that.
A lot of people don't know what goes on over there. When you see it firsthand experience, children, in ragged clothes, living on the street, and that have nothing in their houses all shot up, riddled with bullet holes. It has an effect on you, and you're much more thankful for the freedoms that we have here in Canada.
And joining us now is Bill Shead. He's an Aboriginal veteran, having served in the Navy for over 30 years. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
Tell us about serving in the Navy.
Well, an awful lot of fun. We went by ship to several places in my time. I'm not a veteran of a combat mission. I think the closest we ever came to some sort of conflict would have been during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was serving in HMCS Buckingham at the time, and I had just returned from leave, and the ships were all ordered to their war station by our admiral on the East Coast. I think he did this without even the government's permission. He thought it was the wise thing to do from a naval point of view because of what was happening internationally. But that was uneventful. Certainly we bore a lot of holes in the ocean, and we were tracking submarines, and we were working with other ships and company. But in the end, the whole situation was diffused by President Kennedy and Gorbachev at the time. Not Gorbachev, Khrushchev. Too many chefs. And aside from that, I had a very peaceful time for 30 years in the Canadian Forces. I certainly spent an awful lot of time at sea, served in several ships, from cruisers to aircraft carriers to the Royal Yacht to frigates, destroyers, gate vessels, bird boats. It was quite fun.
What made you want to join the Navy?
Our family, I was thinking about this some time ago, and I was asked to make a few remarks. And I've always been interested in what happened, what members of our family did during wartime. And I found out that 20 men and 1 woman over 4 generations from our family had served in the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and had given over 100 years of service to the country. Several served in the Second World War, three served in the First World War, and the youngest, the most recent, served in Afghanistan. There was one nurse who served briefly in the Canadian Navy and as a reservist. My brother, he's passed away now, he served as a Master Warrant Officer in the Canadian Forces, Air Force, and did 2 tours of service over in Germany during the time that Canada had its forces deployed to occupy Germany. Sadly, we did lose 2 members of our family. The first member that was lost was a young soldier, Kenneth McClure Asham. He was a member of the Peguis Band of Indians, as it was then known, now Peguis First Nations. He was 21 years old when he enlisted and joined the 182nd Battalion in Selkirk, was deployed to England in the fall of 1916. The unit that he joined was broken up, and they sent him and others from the unit to France to reinforce other units there. He served with the 78th Battalion, and it was earmarked to go into battle into the front lines to mount the Vimy attack on the 9th of April. On the 29th of March, he was involved in what they call a bombing accident. This is not a bomb drop from an airplane or a bomb that explodes on the ground. This is a Mills bomb, which is probably a hand grenade. And when they were practicing for the battle, they would use lime ammunition. And I think what happened is this Mills bomb, probably exploded prematurely, seriously wounding him and 4 others. He was the one to die. The second person from our family to be lost was my dad's cousin, Gordon Beresford. Gordon's parents were Bill and Gladys, and Bill was the mayor of Selkirk at the time, and his mother was a member of the Shead family prior to getting married. And Gordon, their son, was lost when HMCS St. Croix, a destroyer, was sunk by a German submarine. Now, not everybody was lost in that initial sinking. In fact, there were a good number that were rescued by a British destroyer, HMS Inchon. Now, Inchon, the next day, was itself sunk, but there were only 2 survivors. And the submarine that sunk those 2 ships was sunk with all hands less than 3 months later. So you have 3 ships from 3 different navies with all hands on all those 3 vessels lost, save 2. One, the Canadian, leading seaman Fisher, was the individual who was served. So war has some tragedies. They're visited upon all families, or most families. Sadly, to be a veteran, you have to be alive. If you're killed in action or you don't return, you're not a veteran. You're still serving. Because we on days like today, Remembrance Day, Decoration Day, when the family visits cemeteries and what have you, you see the headstones marking their memory, maybe not their place of death, but their memory. Because some of these people, they have no known grave. Particular people who were lost at sea don't have a grave, but they are remembered, and those are the memorials that serve today to commemorate their memory. And so I say that those members of the Canadian Forces who were lost are still serving.
And I understand you've been involved with the Memory Project, speaking about memories. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, this is a volunteer organization of veterans and people like me who are prepared to speak for veterans. I think you have to understand, or people have to understand, that we do not have any First World War veterans left.
Mm-hmm.
The Second World War veterans, their average age is about 94, 95. The average age of a Korean War veteran, somewhere in the late 80s. And the average age of servicemen that have retired or who have left the service and are still with us, their average age is, I believe, around 56. Somebody has to tell the stories. And those of us who volunteer to be speakers for the Memory Project try to do that. We give it our best effort. And that's why I tell the story of my family, because I know the story of my family quite well. And not just to talk about my family, but to use it as an illustration of other families and other veterans who cannot speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And today is Aboriginal Veterans Day. What does it mean to you to be an Aboriginal veteran?
Oh, I don't think it matters whether you have the title Aboriginal veteran or veteran. I believe that you're a veteran first because you've served and you've survived. And you're a veteran largely because you served with others. In my case, in the Navy, I have shipmates that I've served with. We never treated each other differently. We were shipmates. I mean, note that term. And comrades in arms is the term that the Army uses. And in the Air Force, it's aircrew. So your identity is tied to your association with the people that you're serving with. Okay? However, it's very, very important to recognize that Aboriginal people are veterans. And sometimes that's lost on the general population. So to have a Aboriginal Veterans Day, or to be called an Aboriginal veteran, is vital for the perception and understanding of other Canadians to know that Indigenous people are making their contribution and have made their contribution. If you look at the community of St. Peter's, the St. Peter's Band of Indians, which was located just north of Selkirk, their land was surrendered in 1907, and it's now known as the Peguis First Nation. And it has been relocated from the banks of the Red River to the banks of the Fish River, some 140 kilometers from where it was originally. They sent 7 people to Denial to relieve Khartoum with the Wolseley Relief Column in 1885. Now, why would a group of people from this part of the world who knew absolutely nothing, I'm sure they knew nothing about Egypt, the Nile, Khartoum. They probably knew nothing about the issues surrounding it. But why did they go? One, their friends asked them. Because General Wolseley, when he brought his forces here to Red River in 1870, he had to travel by the waterways, the rivers, and he depended on the skill of the boatmen of the day. And when he was going to take a column up the Nile to relieve Khartoum, he says, I need guys that skilled. And so we recruited from places like Peguis and Kahnawake in Quebec, and that's why these people went to the Nile in 1885. A little known piece of history, there's a book called Canadians on the Nile. It's worthwhile reading, just to find out that history. In fact, one of the fellows that served was a descendant of Chief Peguis, one of his sons.
What can you tell us about the Tommy Prince medals?
Well, Sergeant Tommy Prince was an extraordinary individual. He spent I think 90% of his career in uniform in battle. He initially joined the engineers. He qualified as a paratrooper and became part of the 1st Special Services Force, which probably is known more intimately as the Devil's Brigade. There's a movie starring William Holden called The Devil's Brigade, and it's about that unit. It was a joint Canadian-American unit. They trained in Montana, and they trained in everything from skiing, mountain climbing, parachuting, everything. And they used special weapons, different weapons, and their approach was completely different to battle than a normal infantry squad. Their first test of battle was to land on the Aleutian Islands, where there was an expected Japanese force occupying it. But by the time they arrived, the Japanese had disappeared. Their next battle was in Italy, and that's where Tommy Prince was awarded the military medal for gallantry. This is a British decoration. If you look at his medals, you will note that on the extreme left, as you look at it, that's the military medal. And he won that for an action where he was an artillery spotter. He was on the forward lines calling the shots of the artillery which was behind him. And on this particular occasion, a shell landed between him and the battery where the guns were and severed the telephone line. So he got up, got himself dressed as a peasant farmer, went out, cursed the Germans, cursed the Allied forces, and went on hoeing his field and got to the break in the line, pretended to tie a shoe and was actually mending the line, went back and continued to call the shots. And that's why he was awarded the medal. Next action was in southern France. Prince was sent out on a patrol to reconnoiter the German positions and force strength. So he walked it was a great distance to find out this information, found it all out with his patrol, and they were on their way back, and they ran into a group of partisans that were having a little bit of difficulty with the German patrol. They joined in that fight and eliminated the German patrol, and he returned to his line, reported to his superior officer, and then led them back to where the German positions were, joined the battle, and for that he was awarded the American Silver Star, which is the medal on the other end of the group of 11 medals that he was awarded.
11 medals.
Yes, well, the two for gallantry are the most unusual, the rarest ones, because those were actually presented to him by King George at Buckingham Palace in April 1945. And I think there are only 4 combinations of the military medal and the Silver Star. Both of the American decoration is quite a significant decoration. He went on to serve in Korea, and he did 2 tours in Korea, took part in a major battle called the Battle of Kapyeongbak, the Battle of the Kapyeong Gap, and his unit, the PPCL unit, I think it was the 2nd Battalion, was awarded the Presidential Citation for bravery, because they held off a huge formation of enemy soldiers at the Gap and probably saved the day for the Allies in that particular battle. Unfortunately, because of his long exposure in battle, he couldn't escape without having what we would call PST, post-traumatic stress syndrome. And he did have a tough life afterwards and died at a relatively early age. I think he was 65 when he passed away in 1977. He's also a residential school. He attended Elkhorn Residential School. So you can see the experience of Indigenous, particularly First Nations people who have gone through all the hardships of living as an Indian, governed by the Indian Act, going to residential schools, and yet we still went and served.
Quite the story. Thank you so much for
You're
sharing this information.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And thank you for your service to our country.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And one more thank you for coming in this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anytime.
That was Bill Shead. And when we come back from break, we will be joined by another Aboriginal veteran, Denis Lamirande. Stay with us. Join our conversation now. Send your thoughts in an email to infocus@aptn.ca. Like our APTN InFocus Facebook page, follow and tweet us at APTN InFocus, or call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Welcome back. Well, let's go to social media now to hear what some of you are saying about today's topic. We asked, what does Aboriginal Veterans Day mean to you? Bernadine writes in, a truth to our people. We as a people recognize and understand that what happens to our neighbors affects everyone. Even though our rights and person are not seen as equal at home, we will fight for what is right for all. Adjigote writes in, honoring our First Nation vets because they never got recognition for their part when they came back. So today I thank the Creator for the life we live today and tomorrow. Troy writes in, our men fought in wars they were never initially recognized for. They fought the white man wars for their own land with their blood, sweat, and tears. And Pauline writes in, it meant they cared for this country as much as anyone, and that's what needs to be taught in our history books. Carly writes in, I look up to all our veterans. They are what keep me fighting for my health. I love them and thank them every day. I even wear my poppy all year long for them. And on Twitter, Doris writes in, acknowledging the sacrifices of our veterans not only on this day, but always. And on Facebook, Heather writes in, I honor them for their services and their willingness to volunteer and experience war, atrophies, wounds, life, and death. Thank you so much for your comments. And today, a commemorative ceremony was held in Winnipeg to honor Aboriginal veterans who served for our country. The event brings together people of all ages to pay tribute to Aboriginal men and women in uniform, past and present.
When veterans sign their name, they're signing no document that states that they'll give up their life, like Ugitchita people, to protect those those freedoms that we have developed over the years. And it's important for young people to see that. They need to know, and that's part of their journey too. It's all part of that history that we have to make sure that we transfer down to our younger people. So it's an oral history and a written history and a visual history of how we live amongst each other and how we deal with the issues of the world like that. So we stay safe, so we protect our people.
And Denis Lamirande is our next guest. He's Métis and served with the Royal Regiment of Artillery from 1959 until the 70s. Thank you so much for coming in today, Denis.
Thank you.
So you were at the ceremony today. Why was it important for you to be there, first of all?
Well, I've had two uncles and my father, both served in the Second World War. His two brothers served in the same regiment, which was the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, and they were the first ones to storm the beaches on D-Day. And my uncle Gabriel, the oldest, was killed in action in April of 1945. And I have his Silver Cross that was awarded to his wife, my aunt. So,
very important day for you. Tell us about your time in Germany.
Well, I had two experiences. One was when I was just a young lad of 18 years old in 1960, and we lived in what we call the shacks. It was barracks, but we call them the shacks. So that was my home for almost 3.5 years, shared with about 50 other guys.
So that was a whole different experience than when I went back the second time in 1967. I was married then. And I had a daughter that was born there in 1970. And she was born at the British Military Hospital. The whole medical system was British because we were under the British command at that time. And being married in Germany, you either lived in the permanent married quarters, or you lived what they call on the economy with the German people. So the experiences with the German people, of course, were far different than living in the permanent married quarters where they were all Canadians, right? So what was interesting is that the kids, the children that were raised with German kids, right? And we also had a French regiment there. So we had the French kids, you had the English kids, you had the German kids. They were all playing together, and they all understood one another, but the parents couldn't understand a word it said when it came time to have supper. So, but you know, the good thing about it there is there were no taxes there. Okay, so anything you bought, beer or cigarettes or whatever, like we could have a package of cigarettes and a beer for 25 cents, which is hard to believe, right? Mm-hmm. And if you, like, you know, being married and going grocery shopping, all the meats you had, like you could have filet mignon for maybe about $1, you know, for 5 pounds kind of thing. So, and you know, again, everything was so cheap, tax-free. So it was like we were living like kings there, and it was really nice. And everything was so close. You could, you know, jump in the car and go to Amsterdam in about 2-3 hours. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Just on a day trip. So.
What were your duties there?
Well, we were part of the British Army on the Rhine, which it was a Canadian brigade that fitted in with the British Army. And so whatever we did, we were under British rule, command, if you like. And so the negative part about that is we had to work Saturday mornings. Okay, so we worked 5 days plus Saturday mornings because the British had sports morning on Saturdays. We never had sports day, but because they were open, you know, and we had to, of course, be available or whatever. But we exercised along with the British Army. So whatever they did, we did, and we went out with them kind of thing. So it was rehearsal. And, you know, when you're just a small part, you really don't know what you're doing, eh? I mean, like, they don't tell us, like, like I was on a gun crew, right? So for me, like, what did I contribute other than being on the gun and being part of a gun crew, which was part of an army? You know, I was so insignificant, right? But we were all there doing our thing and rehearsing with the NATO forces, and that's my medal over here is the NATO forces here, and my other medal over here is we call the Canadian Forces Decoration. That's 12 years of meritorious service. But anyways, going back to what I did, I was on the gun crew. You know, and practicing and rehearsing, and we used to go out quite often in Germany, but in Canada we used to go to Wainwright, Alberta for 6 weeks at a time, like in summertime, 4 weeks in Shiloh doing the gun camps, and then of course there's winter training, and then your career training. So you're busy.
Were you ever caught in action?
Oh, no.
No?
No. The closest... Cyprus in 1966 or 67, I was slated to go to Cyprus over there, and that's what the closest, you know, in terms of being a peacekeeper there between the Cypriots and the Turkish kind of thing and all that. And like my buddies went, and they were, well, it wasn't really, you know, action kind of thing, but it was a little more tense. Mm-hmm. But I didn't get there. I went to Germany instead.
Let's talk a little bit more about the silver cross you're wearing.
Yeah.
It's a very sentimental piece for you. How did you get it passed down to you?
My aunt, the widow, she remarried shortly after my uncle was killed in action. And I never saw her again and had no idea where the Silver Cross was. My cousin, who was friends with the son of my aunt after, we were married, we met up about 4 years later, or just 4 years ago or whatever, and he said, I got this thing here, he says. I don't know what it is. And he had it in a tin, right? And he opened it up and he says, do you know what this is? I said, I certainly do. I said, where'd you get that? He said, from our auntie's son who had it, and how he had it or where he kept it, had no idea. But when I saw that, and then I said, do you know what that really is? He said, no, I have no idea. I had it in this tin box for years. And so I said, well, that belongs to our auntie. She had the Silver Cross because our uncle was killed in action, and the widows and mothers, if they weren't married, you got this. And on the back, it's got the Rifleman Gabriel Lamirande here in the back. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so that's, you know what I mean?
Can you tell us a little bit about your Uncle Gabriel?
I never knew him. He joined in 1939. I was born in 41, and they never came back, as you know. When they left overseas, they stayed overseas. And same thing with my Uncle Vic, like his younger brother. They stayed there in overseas, never saw them. And my Uncle Vic, I didn't even remember my Uncle Vic, of course, because I wasn't born then. I had met my Uncle Vic when he came back in 1940, late 45, early 46. So all I know is that they had a big family, something like about 7 men, 7 girls kind of thing. Back then, that was the thing, eh? Everybody had a large family, so yeah. But my dad came back, like he had joined, and my Uncle Vic came back, and my Uncle Gabe, he wasn't so lucky.
Mm-hmm. You get to carry a piece of him with you always.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And what does Aboriginal Veterans Day mean to you?
Well, it's like this morning we were talking about having something that you feel like it's a family, okay? Like, we're all Native, whether the Indian, Metis, Inuit, or whatever. I mean, we've all experienced something in the forces. We were all in the forces at one time or another. But never having any recognition, per se, like something individual. And this feels to me like it's a family thing. Like everybody is so, nice and friendly and whatever, and coming up to you and, thanking you for your service and whatever. And it just seems a lot more coming from, from your own people. I go to the convention center every year, and, I get a lot of thank yous for your service and whatever, and I truly appreciate it, and I thank them very much. And it's very nice that they do. And, carrying it over with the Native organization, it's nice, yeah. Mm-hmm. I can't say it any other word, but it's nice.
Well, it's very nice to have you on the show this afternoon, Denis. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story with us and telling us about the Silver Cross. It's very important to you, we can tell.
Totally my pleasure.
And thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, time to take another break, and when we come back, another Aboriginal veteran will join us to share his experience. Devon Beaudry will tell us about his time in the Air Force. Welcome back. Well, Aboriginal Veterans Day is still not widely recognized in Canada, but for those who commemorate the day, it's a special time to remember Indigenous veterans from around the world. Tina House attended an event in BC. This is from 2015.
These are the faces of heroes, men and women who sacrificed their own lives to fight for freedom. As traditional drummers beat a rhythm, launching the 11th annual Aboriginal Veterans Day in Vancouver. This year, a few hundred people gathered to pay their respects and honor Indigenous men and women who took part in the wars. Among them is a man who only goes by the name of Old Hands. He's lived in Canada for 25 years, but he's originally from California, and that's where Old Hands signed up to fight in Vietnam at the age of 17 years old.
It's a sad day for me because I remember all my brothers we were like a tight-knit family that never made it back home.
Others brought pictures of loved ones who have passed on, including a photo of Tommy Prince. Prince, among the most decorated Indigenous Canadian soldiers of all time. Wreaths were laid to honor them at the cenotaph in downtown Vancouver.
Provides an opportunity for us to come together and to commemorate our Aboriginal veterans who served this country without hesitation in all major wars.
For Old Hands, it's taken a long time for him to heal the scars from war.
The most thing that haunts me the most is the first person I had to take down. He was no older than I was, and he was just as scared as I was, but I just happened to take the first shot. And after that, I just became numb. I had to do what I had to do, but it wasn't until after I came out the service. I had a very hard time with that.
He says what helped him heal was traditional values, along with praying in a sweat lodge.
My grandpa sat me down and he said, in the old days, our people, the women danced the victory dance, and the men went into the lodges to pray for the souls of those people, the lives that they took, so they wouldn't be haunted by them. And we made amends for those, and he told me that's what I needed to do, and we went back into the sweat lodges, and I did that with some of my other veteran brothers, and we got ourselves past that.
The sufferings that they had as individuals and what they brought home and the stories that were told were truly amazing. And I think what this day means to me is freedom.
The City of Vancouver has proclaimed today as Aboriginal Veterans Day. There is now discussions taking place to make this a national recognized holiday. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
And joining us now is Devon Beaudry. He's a Metis veteran, having served 35 years in the Air Force. Thank you so much for coming in this afternoon, Devon.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, first of all, tell us about finding out that you are Métis. That was when you were 40 years old?
Approximately at that time. There was some rumblings as we were growing up. My brothers back in BC were, I guess, looking at and talking to my dad about, or our father about our heritage, and his cousin had made mention that we were possibly Métis. And my younger brother then started really going into the research and found out, yeah, we were Métis, and I was 40 when we confirmed it.
So then what does Aboriginal Veterans Day mean to you now, knowing your ancestry?
When I found out that I was Métis, it just changed the whole career of my life within the military. I had a purpose then, and I joined a group called the Defense Aboriginal Advisory Group, and that just made my whole career. And by the time I got out, about 10 years later, it kind of defined who I was at that point.
That's fascinating.
So,
tell us about serving in the Air Force.
It was, as a young man, I just joined. I wanted to do something for the country, and the best way that I could think of it was joining the military, and Air Force just kind of happened the way it was. When I joined, it was tri-service. We all wore the same color uniform. There was no distinction between Army, Navy, or Air Force. And about 1985, 86, somewhere around that area, the service then became single again, where you were identified either as Army, Navy, or Air Force. And my job at the time was Air Force, so I ended up wearing the blue uniform, and I ended a career as an RCAF member. So it was a good life. My job was teaching aviation physiology to all the aircrew and operating an altitude chamber. And at the time, a recompression dive chamber. The only one in the Air Force was here in Winnipeg at that time. So it was a rewarding career. I ended it too soon. I wanted to stay, but after 35 years, I figured it was time to move on and let the young ones take over.
So what are you doing now that you're moving on?
I'm actually a massage therapist, a registered massage therapist. I've been practicing now for 2 years, and it's a nice way to relax. I dictate my own hours. I dictate when I want to work, and I get to listen to good music. Mainly a lot of Native American flutes is what I listen to. Sweat lodges. I do walk the Red Road, and I've attended lots of ceremonies in the last number of years just to be part of the community, and it's wonderful.
Let's talk some more a little bit about the ceremonies that you attend. And were you at this morning's ceremony by any chance?
I was, yes.
What was it like for you?
It was very extraordinary in that the amount of people that were there. In not only the crowd, but also the military. There was a huge contingent of the military there, which when I started going to that ceremony on November 8th, there would normally be just the veterans and maybe one or two in uniform and some crowd. So it was a very small contingent at that time. But today, I was very surprised at how many people were there.
It's growing.
And it's awesome. It's great. So.
Why do you think it's important for Canadians across the country to recognize this day?
Because there's so many new Canadians that come onto this world or into this country, they aren't aware of the sacrifices that the Aboriginal people have made for the freedom that we are allowed. They just think that anyone who served in the military was just Canadian. They don't realize that there's actually Aboriginal people as well. Today, there's all nations in there. There's Jewish, Islam, the Aboriginal people, and Canadians. So it's mixed. Now, to be able to understand that, yes, the Aboriginal people were there from the beginning in all the conflicts that Canada has been in, and the Aboriginal people have stepped forward, come forward, and actually fought and given their lives for what we have today. Yeah. And that's very important to, especially like Sergeant Tommy Prince, what he gave and how they recognize him now. So,
what else do you do to honor Aboriginal Veterans Day?
As much as I can. If I'm asked to do interviews or I'm asked to be somewhere, then I'm gladly put on what I'm wearing now and represent the Aboriginal people. I don't just represent the Metis, I represent First Nation, Inuit, as well as myself and the Metis people. So, let's
talk a little bit about what you are wearing. Describe for us.
It's a recognition of a group called the Aboriginal Veterans Autochtones. They came into existence in 2013, and we are advocates for the veterans. And this is our way of showing that we're traditional. We wear the deerskin vest with a whole bunch of other accoutrements on. It varies between the individual what they want to wear. There's no steadfast equipment or regalia that we wear. It's what we feel in our heart and how we want to show ourselves as a veteran.
Can you talk about the medals that you're wearing?
The medals on this here is the Canadian decoration. It has 2 bars on it, and it signifies my service in the military. And it's the only medal that I have because I didn't do any NATO tours or UN tours. I stayed in Canada teaching the Air Force the human physiology of flying. The other medal on this side here is the Aboriginal Veterans Medal to show us that we are Aboriginal, and we only can wear it on the right side. It can't go with the other medals that are worn on the left side. And that's about the only 2 medals that I have.
Wow. Do you think that the Government of Canada can be doing more to recognize Aboriginal veterans?
They're doing very well. Since I got out, there's a lot more things that they're doing for the Aboriginal people, and just allowing, number one, to self-identify and to allow the members to wear braids, male and female, to wear braids to signify that they are Aboriginal. I don't think there's any much more that they can do other than allow them to show their culture. One of the ways that they've actually done this is allowed the members to open up sweat lodges. And we have the only sweat lodge on a permanent site for the Air Force here in Winnipeg. And that was opened up in June of this past year.
All right. Well, so, Devin, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon and sharing your story and giving us a broader insight into Aboriginal Veterans Day. And thank you for your service as well.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Remembrance Day is a time when we reflect on those that served their country. Shanine Robinson sat down with two veterans as they shared their memories and what this time of the year means to them.
He was 20 years old when he packed his few meager belongings and headed to Cyprus on a peacekeeping mission.
Join the Army and you learn to survive. You learn how to live with nothing.
Nearly 55 years later, Mikans remembers his decade serving for the Canadian Guards. And then in Germany as one of Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry's 1st Battalion soldiers.
What role do you think Aboriginal people played in protecting this country?
They played a major role because they were all snipers, because they knew how to hunt. They knew how to stalk. Most of them were, they got them as scouts going out on snipers.
Although he lost his Indian status by signing up to be in the Army, Mikant says at that time in his life it was either serve his country or serve time in jail. He says his heritage was never an issue between him and his comrades, and he always felt respected.
No, you're just like one big family. But it's up to each individual how they're going to be treated when you're in the Army.
The new government of Canada just swore in its first ever Sikh Minister of National Defence. Harjit Sajan was a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves and is a combat veteran who served in Bosnia and Afghanistan. Some say his new appointment has broken down barriers for minorities. Joseph Mikant says he's just glad he's qualified for the position.
We got a person that understands the Army life. He served the people.
Veteran Chad Anderson agrees and was eager to read about Canada's new defence minister.
I like to learn a little bit more about this guy, and then after finding out his background, I thought, okay, that's pretty awesome.
35-year-old Anderson served as a U.S. Marine in his 20s and completed tours in Kuwait and Iraq. Later on, he served in the Canadian Forces. He says the fact that he's a treaty Indian was never an issue for him.
The race didn't really factor into anything, because at the end of the day, we were all doing the same thing, training together as brothers, sisters.
At this time of year, he remembers those he served with and the things he witnessed. The city of Ramadi in Iraq, where he was deployed in 2008, was chaos at the time. It's something Anderson says he will never forget.
A lot of people don't know what goes on over there. When you see it firsthand experience, children, in ragged clothes, living on the street, and that have nothing in their houses all shot up, riddled with bullet holes. It has an effect on you, and you're much more thankful for the freedoms that we have here in Canada.
Both veterans say the history of how they and so many others served their countries need to be remembered and passed down to younger generations.
I always say every day should be Veterans Day, because if it wasn't for the veterans, you wouldn't have radio, TV, or anything. You'd be in capitalism. People will be telling you what to do, but we got freedom.
Mikans and Anderson are two of Manitoba's Aboriginal veterans. Both promise to continue sharing their stories to ensure history is taught to the young ones. Shanine Robinson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
I'm Juanita Tautungi, Davao Buhi.